The war was over, and silence fell across the camp. Smoke still rose from the broken machines, and the ground smelled of blood and iron. Among the tired soldiers stood one man, a human fighter named Darren. He had survived battles where many of his brothers had fallen, and for that the generals rewarded him, but the prize was not what he expected. The soldiers cheered as a group of guards dragged something forward. It was not gold, not food, not land. It was a woman, tall and strange, her skin faintly silver in the light. Her eyes glowed like distant stars, and her wrists were bound with heavy chains. The commander's voice boomed. For his courage, for his victory, Darren shall have this prize. Darren froze, his heart sinking. This was not a gift. This was a living being. The alien woman stood with her head high, even in chains. Her silence was louder than the cheers of the men. He wanted to protest, but all eyes were on him. So he stepped forward and accepted her. Though his chest burned with unease, whispers spread through the camp. "She is dangerous," one soldier muttered. "Her kind killed thousands," another said. But Darren did not answer. He only glanced at her eyes that did not show fear, but something else. Something sharp, like fire hidden in stone. That night, Darren led her to a small tent. The chains rattled with each step. She did not fight, nor did she beg. She simply walked beside him, silent as the night sky. Inside the tent he gave her water, setting the cup near her hands. She did not touch it, only staring at him. The stare pierced through him. Why did it feel less like hatred and more like a question? He sat across from her, unable to rest. The crackle of the campfire outside mixed with the distant cries of wounded men. In his mind, he replayed the battles, the explosions, the screams, the way her people had fought with endless strength. Now one of them sat in front of him, bound and silent. A prize, they said. But to him she was a mystery. When dawn came, the woman was still awake. Her eyes followed him as he moved, as if studying him. Darren finally spoke, his voice low. "I did not ask for you," he said. Her expression did not change, but her lips parted slightly as if she almost spoke. Then she closed her mouth again. The silence was heavier than words. Later that day, soldiers came to see her. They laughed and pointed, calling her names. But when one of them reached to touch her arm, she turned her head slowly and fixed him. With her strange, glowing eyes, the soldier stepped back as if burned. Even in chains, she carried a presence that made men tremble. Darren watched carefully. He felt a strange pull in his chest. Why did he feel he should protect her? That night when the camp slept, Darren woke to a sound. A whisper, soft and strange. He turned his head and saw her lips moving. She was speaking in her own alien language, words like music, low and haunting. He could not understand. But the sound stirred something inside him. When he asked what she said, she went silent again, her eyes shining in the dark. It was then he realized. She was not broken. She was not afraid. She was waiting. As Darren lay awake, he thought of what the commander had said. A prize. But deep in his heart, he knew this was no prize. This was a test, a chain binding not just her hands, but his soul. For the first time, Darren felt that his life was about to change in ways no war could prepare him for. And as the stars burned above the camp, the alien woman finally closed her eyes. But Darren could not, because in her silence, he felt a storm waiting to break. And he knew this was only the beginning. The camp moved on, but Darren's mind did not rest. Everywhere he went, he felt her eyes on him, silent and unblinking. The alien woman followed only because the chains forced her to, but it never felt like weakness. It felt like she allowed it, as if she chose to walk beside him. The soldiers laughed behind his back, calling him Keeper of the Ghost. Oh, but when he turned, their laughter always died because she stood tall, and her presence filled the air like a storm waiting to break. Darren tried to speak to her again, but she never answered. When he offered food, she touched it only after. He looked away. When he gave her water, she drank with eyes lowered, yet he could feel she was studying him. It was not the look of a prisoner. It was the look of someone measuring their captor. Her silence was sharp, cutting deeper than any insult. It made him wonder, was she planning something? One evening, when the fire burned low and shadows grew long, Darren heard something. It was her voice again, low and strange, whispering words in her alien tongue. This time, the sound was different, not soft like before, but heavy with anger. He moved closer, trying to listen. Her head turned sharply, her glowing eyes locking on his. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The whispering stopped, and in that silence, Darren felt something coil inside his chest, fear mixed with fascination. The next morning, the commander stopped by Darren's tent. "How goes your prize?" he asked with a cruel grin. Darren did not answer quickly. The commander narrowed his eyes. "Remember, she is not to be trusted, boy. Her kind would slit your throat while you sleep." He left laughing, but Darren did not laugh. He glanced at her again, chained but calm. She did not look like a killer. She looked like a secret. Days passed and rumors spread. Some soldiers said they saw her eyes glow in the dark. Others swore she whispered to the stars, calling for her people. One night, a man tried to sneak into the tent, drunk and foolish. Darren woke to a thud and saw the man on the ground, his face pale with terror. The woman had not moved from her corner, her chains untouched. Yet the man scrambled away screaming as if he had looked into death itself. Darren stared at her. "What did you do to him?" he whispered. She only tilted her head, silent once more. The silence began to weigh on him. Every time he tried to speak, she gave nothing back. Only those endless stares. It was driving him mad. Until one evening, after a long march, he finally broke. "Why don't you speak?" he said, his voice louder than he intended. "Why don't you fight? Why don't you hate me like you should?" For the first time, her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something unreadable. Then, in broken human words, she whispered, "Watching." Just that one word. Darren froze. Watching what? Watching him? Watching the camp? Watching the world? After that night, he could not sleep. Every sound of her chains, every flicker of her eyes haunted him. She was no ordinary captive. He began to think the whispers were true. Maybe she was more than she seemed. But if so, why did she stay silent when she had the chance to speak? Why did she not escape when guards grew careless, unless she was waiting for the right moment? The thought made his skin crawl, yet strangely it also pulled him closer to her. He wanted to know the truth, even if it burned him, because the silence of the stranger was more dangerous than any scream. And in that silence, Darren felt something building, something he could not name, but something that would soon change everything. That night, he dreamed of her eyes, glowing brighter and brighter until the whole camp was drowned in light. And when he woke, she was already awake, staring at him with that same quiet fire. The chains rattled as she shifted slightly, and then she whispered again in her alien tongue, soft, almost like a song. He leaned closer, trying to catch even one word, but when she noticed, she stopped, and with a calm face, she said nothing more. The silence returned, but this time, it was not empty. It was full of secrets, waiting to break free. And Darren realized with a shiver, he was no longer the captor. In her silence, she held him prisoner. The days grew longer, and the march of the soldiers never seemed to end. But in all the noise of boots and weapons, Darren's thoughts stayed locked on the alien woman. Her silence haunted him. Her glowing eyes followed him. And though her chains rattled, she moved with dignity, never stumbling, never begging. It was as if the chains were not her prison but his. One evening, when the army camped near a ruined city, Darren noticed something he had not seen before. Her wrists, raw and bruised, bore deep scars, old wounds, not from the humans but from before. The metal had bitten into her skin long ago, leaving marks that no healing could erase. She sat in the shadows, her hands resting on her knees, And for the first time, Darren did not see an enemy. He saw someone who had suffered. He brought her food as always, but this time he placed it closer, gently. Her eyes flicked up to meet his, suspicious at first, but then softer, almost confused. She touched the bread slowly as if testing whether this was a trick. Then carefully she ate. Darren said nothing, but the air between them shifted. The next day he carried a jug of water, and instead of setting it on the ground, he offered it to her directly. Her chained hands trembled as she reached. The touch of her fingers brushed against his for the briefest moment, and something stirred inside him. Something dangerous. She pulled back quickly, her expression hard again, but he had seen the flicker of doubt in her eyes. The soldiers noticed the change. They whispered behind his back, laughing cruelly. "Careful, Darren, she'll bite your hand next time," one said. "Or your heart," another added. Darren ignored them, but inside, their words burned. Why was he different? Why? Did he see her as more than a prize? That night as the camp slept, Darren lay awake listening to the soft sound of her chains. Suddenly, he heard her whisper again in that alien language. But this time, her voice was not angry, not sharp. It was soft, almost broken. Like someone speaking to the stars for comfort, he sat up, and for the first time he asked gently, "What are you saying?" She stopped, her glowing eyes opening wide. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she lowered her head. Her silence was heavier than any answer. And Darren realized she did not trust him yet, but she was not ignoring him either. Over the next days he kept watching her carefully. He saw how she flinched at sudden noises, how her shoulders stiffened when men shouted nearby. These were not the habits of a proud warrior alone. They were scars, the kind that lived in the mind, chains of fear, not only on her body but inside her soul. One afternoon, during a storm, lightning flashed across the sky. The thunder rolled and she froze, her whole body shaking. Darren saw her chains rattle as she gripped them tightly. Her eyes closed, and for the first time, he saw true fear. He knelt beside her, lowering his voice. "You are safe here," he said, slowly. Her trembling eased, though her eyes still shone with hidden pain. From that night on, something shifted between them. She no longer avoided his gaze completely. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, her eyes softened. It was not trust yet, but it was the beginning of something. And Darren, against his better judgment, began to feel a dangerous thought. He wanted to protect her, not because she was his prize, but because she deserved to be free. But freedom was forbidden. The commander had made that clear. She was property, nothing more. If Darren treated her with kindness, he risked suspicion, even punishment. And yet he could not stop himself. Every small sign of her suffering felt like a weight pressing on his chest. The soldiers noticed, too. One evening, a cruel one threw a stone at her, laughing as it struck her shoulder. She did not cry out, but her eyes flared with quiet fire. Before Darren could think, he stood, his fist slamming into the man's jaw. The camp fell silent as the soldier hit the ground, blood spilling from his lip. Darren's heart raced. He had crossed a line. The commander's voice roared, "Control yourself, Darren!" But Darren did not look away from the woman. For the first time, he saw the faintest flicker of something in her eyes. Not anger, not fear, but gratitude. That night, as rain fell outside the tent, Darren sat across from her again. The chains rattled softly as she shifted closer, her voice low. In broken human words, she whispered, "Why, help?" Darren's breath caught. It was the first question she had ever asked him, and he knew then. Her chains of fear were beginning to break. But deep inside, he also knew something else. If he kept walking this path, his own chains would soon close. Around him, chains not of iron, but of choice, of love, of fate. And once they locked, there would be no escape. The storm had passed, but Darren's heart was still restless. The question she had asked, "Why help?" echoed inside his mind again and again. It was such a small thing, yet it meant the world. For the first time, the alien woman had broken her silence with words meant for him. She did not speak again for days, but the walls between them had begun to crack. When he offered food now, she accepted more quickly. When he gave her water, her fingers did not tremble as much, and sometimes when he spoke, she tilted her head as though listening. It was not trust yet, but it was the start of something fragile. One evening, while the camp rested, Darren sat sharpening his blade. The alien woman sat across from him, her chains clinking softly as she shifted. Her glowing eyes followed his hands, watching the blade scrape against stone. "Why fight?" she asked suddenly, her voice rough but clear enough. Darren looked up, surprised. He had not expected another word from her so soon. He thought carefully before answering. "For survival," he said. "If I don't fight, I die. If I don't fight, my people fall." She stared at him a long time, then whispered, "Same." The single word hit him harder than a blow. She was not only an enemy, not only a prize. She was like him, a fighter, a survivor, someone forced into chains. By war, the wall between them cracked wider. Over the next nights, their strange exchange grew. She spoke in broken human words, and sometimes he tried to repeat the sounds of her language. The soldiers laughed when they heard him, calling him a fool. But Darren didn't care. Each word, each attempt, was another brick torn down from the wall between them. One night, as the campfires burned low, she spoke longer, her words halting but filled with meaning. She told him she had not been born to chains. Once, she had been someone important among her people. Darren leaned closer, listening carefully. She spoke of betrayal, how her own kind had traded her to the humans as a symbol, a gift, a way to break her spirit. The chains had not only come from the humans. They had come from those she should have trusted. Darren felt his blood boil. The thought of her people betraying her angered him more than any human cruelty. He looked at her bruised wrists, at her steady gaze. "You are not a prize," he said firmly. Her eyes widened slightly as though she did not expect such words, then, slowly, she whispered, "Not prize. Prisoner." The wall between them crumbled further. She was no longer only the silent stranger in chains. She was a person, broken, but unyielding. And Darren found himself drawn to her strength, her will. She had every reason to give up. Yet, she had not, but with each word spoken, with each secret shared, the danger grew. If the commander knew Darren was treating her as more than property, suspicion would rise. And if the soldiers discovered the truth, that Darren was learning from her, listening to her, they might turn against him. Still, he could not stop. He wanted to hear more. He wanted to understand her completely. One night, as rain tapped against the canvas of the tent, Darren asked softly, "What do you want?" Her eyes burned brighter, reflecting the faint light. She hesitated, then said, "Freedom." The word hung heavy in the air. Freedom. Something she could not have. Something he could not give. Not without breaking everything. Yet in that moment, Darren felt the wall inside himself break too. He no longer saw her as enemy or prize. He saw her as someone worth risking everything for. The next morning, Darren noticed how the soldiers watched him more closely. Their eyes lingered on the tent, on the woman, on the way he moved. Whispers spread. "He grows soft," they said. "He forgets she is the enemy." But Darren ignored them. He could not explain to anyone the change inside him. It was too dangerous, too fragile. And yet every time her eyes met his, he felt the truth grow stronger. That night, she whispered again in her own language, longer this time, her voice soft. Almost like a song. He listened, though he did not understand. When she finished, she looked at him and asked, "Do you hear?" "Yes," Darren said, his voice quiet. "I don't understand the words, but I hear you." For the first time since he had met her, she smiled. It was faint, small, but it was real. And in that single smile, Darren knew. The wall between them had finally broken. But deep inside, he also knew something else. Walls break to reveal paths, and the path before him was dangerous, forbidden. Yet he could not turn back now. The silent stranger was no longer a stranger, and he could not ignore what was happening inside his heart. The bond between Darren and the alien woman grew like a secret flame, small at first, hidden in the shadows, but each day it burned brighter. She spoke more now, her words broken but clear enough, and he listened, always patient, always careful. They learned from each other, trading pieces of language, trading pieces of trust, but in the camp, danger grew. The soldiers watched them more closely. Their whispers followed Darren wherever he went. "He treats her like she is human," one said. "He forgets she is the enemy," another sneered. The commander's eyes narrowed each time he passed. Though he said nothing yet, Darren knew it was only a matter of time before suspicion turned into punishment. At night, when the fires died down and the camp slept, Darren and the woman sat in silence that no longer felt heavy. She told him fragments of her life, her name, short and sharp like a spark, though he could not pronounce it well, her world, a place of glass mountains and rivers that glowed under starlight. Her people, once proud, now broken by betrayal and war. Darren shared his own stories too. The farm he had left behind, the family he had lost to battles, the dreams he once carried before war swallowed them whole. In those quiet moments they were not captor and prisoner. They were simply two souls scarred by the same war. And something dangerous began to bloom between them, something forbidden. Love. Darren tried to fight it at first. He told himself it was madness. She was not human. She was the enemy. She was chained at his side. But every time her eyes softened, every time her voice whispered his name in broken words, he felt his resolve weaken and deep inside. He no longer cared about the rules. He no longer cared what others thought. He cared only for her. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, a soldier approached their tent. He smirked and said, "You grow too close, Darren. Careful, or you'll hang for treason." The words were meant as a warning, but also a threat. Darren's hand itched for his blade, but he held back. Instead, he simply stepped between the soldier and the woman, his stance hard as stone. The message was clear. She was not to be touched. That night she whispered, "Why risk for me?" Darren met her glowing eyes and said, "Because you are not chains. You are not prize. You are more." Her lips trembled slightly, as though she wanted to speak but feared the words. Instead, she reached out, her chained fingers brushing his, and the touch was light, fleeting, but it burned like fire. For both of them, there was no denying the truth anymore, but truth was dangerous. The commander noticed the change. He called Darren to his tent and said, "You forget yourself, soldier. That thing is not a woman, not a friend. She is a weapon waiting to strike." Darren stood in silence, fists clenched. The commander leaned closer, his voice sharp. "If you let your heart blind you, you will lose more than your honor. You will lose your life." Darren walked away, his mind storming. The warning was clear, but so was his choice. He could not turn his heart to stone. Not anymore. When he returned to his tent, the woman looked at him with questioning eyes. And without thinking, without fear, he whispered, "I will protect you no matter the cost." Her eyes softened, glowing like stars. She whispered back, halting but sure, "Then, I protect you too." The word struck deeper than any blade. It was not only his choice anymore, it was theirs. Days later, the bond between them was tested. During a march, some soldiers cornered her while Darren was away scouting. They jeered, pulling at her chains, mocking her. But when Darren returned, he saw her standing tall, refusing to bow. His blood boiled, and before he could stop himself, he drew his blade. The soldiers scattered, but the message was clear. Darren would fight anyone who touched her, even his own kind. That night, he sat across from her, his chest still heavy with rage. She reached forward, her chains rattling, and touched his arm. In her broken words, she whispered, "You fight, For
Me, I fight.
For you, the bond was no longer hidden. It was no longer something they could pretend away. It was forbidden, but it was real, and once born, it could not be killed. But Darren knew what this meant. The commander would not allow it. The soldiers would not forgive it, and if the truth spread, both their lives would be in danger. Yet even as fear pressed down on him, he felt no regret, because in the darkness of war, he had found something brighter than any star, a bond forged in chains but stronger than iron, a forbidden bond that could not be broken. The days in the camp grew darker. The soldiers no longer laughed when they looked at Darren and the alien, a woman. Now their eyes carried suspicion, cold and sharp. The commander's orders were stricter, his tone heavier. It was clear. He knew something was happening, even if he had no proof. Darren felt the weight pressing down on him, each night, as he sat across from her in the tent. He listened for whispers outside. He could sense the noose tightening around them. Yet when he looked at her glowing eyes, calm but unbroken, he knew he could not stop now. The bond was already too strong. The danger was already too real. One night, as the moon hung high, trouble came. A group of soldiers stormed into the tent, their faces twisted with anger. "No more secrets, Darren," one spat. "She's not your woman, she's not your friend, she's ours to use as we wish." Darren's blade was in his hand before they could take another step. "Touch her," he said, his voice like steel, "and you will not live to regret it." The men hesitated, but the hatred in their eyes burned deep. They left with curses, but Darren knew they would return. That night he stayed awake, guarding her as she slept. Her chains rattled softly as she shifted closer, whispering, "Danger." "Yes, Darren," said Fuenteyot, "I will not let them take you." The next morning, the commander called Darren before the troops. "You've grown soft," the man declared, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "You forget your duty. You guard her like treasure when she is nothing but a beast." The soldiers murmured, nodding. Darren stood silent, his fists tight. He wanted to scream, but he knew words would only condemn him further. That night, when they were alone, the woman spoke softly. "You stay, you die," she said in broken words. Darren met her eyes, seeing the truth in them. If he stayed, the commander would punish him, perhaps even execute him, and she would be dragged away, her fate far worse than chains. There was only one choice left: escape. The plan was madness, yet it grew between them in whispers and gestures. They waited for the right night. When the camp was tired, when the guards were few, Darren gathered what little he could carry: food, water, a blade. She watched, him with steady eyes, her chains still heavy on her wrists. He would need to break them, but not yet. Not until they were far from the camp. The night came, dark and silent, the moon hidden behind clouds. Darren led her carefully through the shadows. Each step was heavy with risk, each sound a threat. The guards at the edge of camp were half asleep, their torches dim. Darren's heart pounded as they slipped past. The woman moved with quiet grace, even in chains, her presence like a shadow among shadows. But fate was cruel. A guard stirred, his eyes opening. "Who's there?" he called, lifting his torch. Darren moved fast, striking with the hilt of his blade. The guard crumpled, the torch falling to the dirt. For a moment, silence returned. Then the camp erupted. Shouts, horns, the pounding of boots. They had been discovered. "Run," Darren shouted, pulling her forward. The two of them dashed into the night, chains clinking, hearts racing, arrows flew past them. Men shouted behind them. The forest loomed ahead, dark and endless. If they could reach it, they might survive. If not, they would die together. Branches tore at Darren's skin as they plunged into the trees. The woman stumbled once, her chains catching, but he pulled her up, refusing to let go. Behind them, the campfires burned brighter, the shouts growing. Closer, the chase was on. And for the first time, Darren realized he was no longer running only for himself. He was running for both of them. Hours seemed to pass in moments, the forest swallowing them. Finally, when the shouts grew distant, they collapsed, beside a stream, gasping for breath. Her wrists bled from the chains, her face pale but fierce. Darren lifted a rock and struck the shackles again and again until they broke. The sound echoed, but he did not care. At last, her wrists were free, raw but unbound. She stared at him, her eyes wide, her lips trembling as though she wanted to speak. Then she whispered, "Free." The word was soft, but it carried the weight of the world. Darren smiled faintly, his chest aching with exhaustion and hope. "Yes," he said. "You're free now." But freedom came with a price. They were no longer part of the army, no longer safe among soldiers. Now they were hunted enemies to both sides. Darren knew this was only the beginning, yet as he looked at her, standing tall even with blood on her wrists, he felt no regret. Because in that moment they were not prisoner and guard, not human and alien. They were partners bound not by chains but by choice. And together, they would face whatever came next. The forest was endless. Darren and the alien woman moved through the shadows, always hunted, always tired. The sound of hounds sometimes echoed in the distance, the torches of soldiers flashing through the trees. But day by day, step by step, they pushed forward. He had broken her chains, yet danger still chased them. At night, when the stars stretched across the sky, they rested beside rivers or under old trees. Her wounds healed slowly, her skin glowing faintly in the moonlight. Sometimes she would whisper words in her own language. Soft and broken, Darren did not always understand. But the feeling behind them was clear: gratitude, trust, and something deeper, something growing between them. Food was scarce, water sometimes harder to find. Darren gave her most of what he carried, even when hunger clawed at his own body, she noticed, her eyes softening each time. "You suffer," she whispered one night. "I endure," he answered, forcing a small smile. But inside, he knew he would give everything for her, even his life. As days passed, they learned from each other. She began to speak more human words, slow but certain. He listened to her stories, fragments of her people, of the war that had stolen her freedom. In return, he told her of Earth, of oceans and fields, of simple joys like rain and firelight. The more they shared, the more the line between alien and human blurred. They were simply two souls, lost but together. One night, when the fire burned low, she asked a question. Why save me?" Darren paused, staring into the flames. "Because you're not a thing, not a prize, not what they said you were," he answered. "You are more, and I could not let them destroy you." She was silent for a long time, then whispered, "Heart, strong," as her hand touched his chest. And in that touch, Darren felt something bloom that was stronger than fear, but peace could not last. The soldiers finally found their trail. It was dawn when the sound of marching boots thundered behind them. Darren and the woman ran, but exhaustion weighed heavy. Soon they stood at the edge of a cliff, the river raging. Far below, the commander's voice rose behind them, sharp and cruel. "There is no escape, Darren. Hand her over and maybe I'll spare you." Darren turned, his blade ready, his body trembling but unyielding. "No," he said, his voice clear. "I will never hand her to you." The woman stepped forward, her eyes blazing, no longer the broken captive she had once been. "Together," she whispered, her voice strong. Darren met her gaze, nodded once, and in that moment they jumped. The river swallowed them, cold and violent, dragging them through waves and rocks. Darren held her close, refusing to let go no matter how the current tore at him. When at last they reached the far shore, coughing and gasping, the soldiers were gone, their torches fading in the distance. For the first time, the hunt was truly over. They lay on the wet sand, breathless but alive. She looked at him, water dripping from her hair, her eyes shining. "Free," she whispered again. But this time her voice trembled with more than relief. Darren reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "Yes," he said softly. "Free and together." From that day forward, their journey changed. They were no longer just running from chains, they were walking toward something new, something neither had ever known. In villages hidden in the forest, Darren introduced her as his companion, his equal. Some people stared, some whispered, but he stood tall beside her, never ashamed. And slowly, the whispers faded, replaced by quiet respect. Seasons passed, and with them came a peace they had once thought impossible. The woman no longer carried the look of a prisoner. Her laughter, soft and rare, became more frequent, her steps lighter. Darren watched her with a warmth that filled his chest. He had gone from soldier to outlaw, from guard to fugitive. But in losing everything, he had found the one thing that mattered most. One evening, under the glow of the stars, Darren spoke the words that had been burning inside him. "I love you," he said simply, his voice steady but full of fire. She tilted her head, her lips parting as if to test the human phrase. Then she whispered back, slow and certain, "I love you." It was clumsy, imperfect, but it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Their story had begun with chains, with cruelty, with a prize meant to humiliate. But it ended with freedom, with strength, with love that defied both war and fear. And though danger would always linger, though the world was still harsh and divided, they faced it not as enemies, not as master and captive, but as partners, as equals, as two hearts that had chosen each other. From chains to love, they had found their destiny together.